My name is James Pustiewski. I'm the chair of the AERA SIG on systematic review and meta-analysis. And this is, I think, our, third or fourth seminar of the academic year. This morning, I'm really pleased to introduce Amy Riegelman. Amy holds an MLIS from Dominican University, and she's currently the social science librarian at the University of Minnesota. There, she also co-chairs their systematic review service. Amy's work is really notable for bringing this the perspective of library and information sciences to ongoing discussions and reforms around open science, replicability, and research synthesis, with a focus in the social sciences. Along with her colleague at Megan Coker at U of M, and then colleagues in other places, she leads the Evidence Synthesis Institute, which is providing training for librarians and information specialists in evidence synthesis methodology. And I think this sort of work is just tremendously exciting because the systematic search and information retrieval has been almost exclusively the providence of health sciences specialists for a long time. There's lots of developed knowledge within medicine and health sciences, much less for social sciences. And so broadening the knowledge base around systematic search to include the social sciences, and I think is really critical work. And I think it's going to lead to big improvements in practice and potentially also new avenues for research and development. So I will stop fanboying and just lay out now the rules for today. Amy is going to present, I think, for 40 to 45 minutes, and we'll during that time, if you have questions, please feel free to post them in the chat, and we'll kind of monitor the chat there and elevate anything that's like critical. And otherwise, we'll have plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end. So with that, I will pass it over to Amy. And thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. All right. So yeah, that was a really nice introduction. I appreciate that. I'm going to be talking about comprehensive searching and transparently reporting those searches. I'm going to start with a little bit about me. Some of that was already covered, so I can breeze through. We're going to get to the heart of it. I think a lot of you are probably here. We're going to talk about like tips and tricks for comprehensive searching, transparently reporting how we're doing that searching, and then what I see as coming up down the road. Okay, so Megan Coker, as mentioned, a colleague of mine, she's in nutrition and agriculture topics at the University of Minnesota as a librarian. Her and I have an IMLS grant, training grant, to train other librarians on how to support evidence synthesis. And I bet a few of the librarians at your various institutions have gone through our program before. So we're really proud of that work, and we feel strongly that librarians internationally should get up to speed on the level of comprehensiveness needed in these search strategies. I know Terry through Campbell Collaboration. In Campbell Collaboration, I'm on the Information Retrieval Methods group. I also peer review for Campbell and other journals that publish systematic reviews. I co-chair our service at the University of Minnesota. And I think I'll skip through that slide because most of that was covered, but at our institution, around 2015, some colleagues and I started noticing we're getting more and more requests in the social sciences, but also the sciences and engineering, where people are coming to us with not just like a transactional reference inquiry, but a question that is for the purposes of systematic reviews or related methodologies. And we found that they expected librarians to have been equipped to handle such questions, and we really weren't. So together with some of my colleagues in those disciplines that were also noticing an uptick, we started to come together and talk about what training would look like. As mentioned, our health science librarian colleagues were already trained and doing a lot of this work already. So we benefited greatly from learning their strategies. But I would also add that in the health sciences, their comprehensive searching can look quite different. So the literature might be much better indexed, and it could be more contained in like 2 or 3 databases, such as Medline and Embase and CINAHL, some of those health databases. Where in the reviews that I support in the social sciences tend to be dispersed. So like the literature is in all of these different databases, and it would be irresponsible for me not to search in all of those different places. So I think that's a pretty big difference between the social sciences and the health sciences. So after we received this training, we launched a service, and the service has grown, and we can't really even advertise it because we don't have capacity to support all of the requests that we get for supporting systematic reviews at our own institution. And so we had noticed that there was an uptick at our institution with the reference inquiries, and so we also went into the literature to feel assured that it's not just us, it's happening across the board, as I'm sure you know, and these different disciplines outside the health sciences, that this is a preferred methodology and is growing and trending. So we need to be equipped to support the search strategies. One of the reasons why researchers have come to librarians is because they are given this guidance in various ways. So Campbell and Cochrane, in their various handbooks, and other institutions as well, have listed that you should consider working with a librarian, or you should work with a librarian, often called information specialists in Europe. And so this should be on a consulting level or even a co-author level, that a librarian is assisting a comprehensive search. And then we also have the evidence. So the published literature reporting on the value of having librarians work on these searches. And so we have some research on the reproducibility of search strategies when there's a librarian working on the team. And so that's been kind of cool evidence to look at. All right, so what do I mean by comprehensive searching? You're going to want to include, I think this slide's so texty, I'm going to go back to a quieter slide. You're going to want to include everything within the scope of your research question. And if you don't, it is likely going to come up in peer review, which has happened to me before, where the peer reviewers will say, hey, now you forgot this, seminal article, published in 1998 that should really be included. And then we'll try to investigate why it wasn't discovered, or push back and say, actually, that doesn't meet our inclusion criteria. So that's one reason why you would want to be very comprehensive. Rigor, obviously, you're committed, and you want to make sure that you're including everything out of the goodness of your heart. And then also sometimes things get published, and this even happens at Cochrane and Campbell level, gold standard reviews, where people are very upset that certain literature wasn't included. So you don't want that to happen, right? So you want to make sure that you are identifying everything published on your topic. And so some things to consider in terms of where you go looking to identify the literature and how would be questions like this. So is your topic multidisciplinary? It might be primarily education, but have an angle to it that would mean that it's also indexed in relevant to psychology scholars. So what might be in ERIC, but also in PsycInfo. You would want to consider which journals would be interested in publishing your topic. Maybe there's certain conferences or like niche conferences that specialize in your research area. Might want to think about the language and how it's changed over time, and related geography of your scope. So if you're interested in an education topic and want to include things from research done in other countries, they may be using very different terms to describe things that, we're used to using terms for in the United States. Like public school could mean something very different somewhere else. And how recent is your topic? So some databases specialize in that archival content. Maybe they've digitized things that are very old, whereas other journals are focused on the more recent literature. And so that may guide you in selecting certain databases and even keywords. Okay. So when we are working with a research team, we ask them for what we call seed articles. So we'll say, okay, here's your research question. Can you please share with us a couple of articles, or a couple of, don't necessarily need to be an article, a couple of sources that you would anticipate including in your review? And then we work backwards. So if they gave us an article that was published in Journal of Mathematics Teacher Education, I could go to that journal's website to see where they claim their index. The journal websites often like to brag about where they're indexed, right? So they want you to submit to their journal and they'll say, hey, we're indexed in all of these wonderful places. And there's also a directory, Ulrich's periodical directory, that can be searched by journal title, and each of those entries will reveal which databases are indexing the content of that journal and the time period. So maybe that's this journal is an ERIC, but only 1996 to present. And so this is part of my workflow that I check Ulrich's periodical directory for every journal that's shared with me from a team. So then I can make sure it's getting captured in the search. And then we continue to do this. So then I could take the next article that they've shared with me, plug in the journal title in Ulrich's, or go directly to the journal's webpage, and continue identifying the databases. And they're going to vary, right? So some things would be indexed in Web of Science, whereas other things are indexed in Scopus. And so you're going to start thinking through which databases would I need to select to ensure that all of these seed articles are going to show up in the results. Okay, and here's another one that has, a longer list of places where it's indexed. The next thing that I would recommend doing is taking one of the seed articles and looking to see in the database, in one of the databases where it's indexed, the terms that are used in the title, in the abstract, and then also the subject headings. We call this term harvesting. So it's taking a known item and looking at the terms that scholars are using, and then also identifying the subject headings that are being assigned by the database. So the folks at Department of Education look at the articles as they're submitted or as they're published in an issue. And when they're indexed, then they are assigned relevant subject headings. So you can get an idea of which subject headings are being assigned to your topic area. This was an actual review that's ongoing, looking at teaching methods in statistics. And so I would glean certain terms and subject headings from this entry. Okay, so after I would do that on a few different seed articles, I could start thinking about, excuse me, I have to cough. I'll turn off my mic real quick. Why can't I find the bar that has mute? There we go. Okay, so then you might think about taking those terms that you've discovered and synonyms, perhaps terms that my subject experts that I work with are also telling me to use, and putting them into a framework. Now in the health sciences, PICO is often used, and I'll tell you what that is. But there's others. You don't need to feel trapped into using one of these frameworks. There's a whole variety of frameworks, and sometimes it doesn't make sense to use a framework, but it helps me in my head formulate how I'm going to design a search strategy. So for PICO, that's referring to the population as the P, intervention as the I, comparator or control as the C, and O for the outcomes. Now, in a lot of the disciplines that I support, we don't have randomized control trials. There might not be a C, and that's fine. But then I would think about my question. So a Campbell review that I'm working on, it's in the peer review pipeline right now, is looking at flipped classrooms and the effectiveness towards improved learning outcomes. And so that's a pretty easy one to put into this framework. The population would be students in these various educational settings. That one was not limited. I don't think it was limited to educational levels, but it was interested in health science topics. So health being taught at any age, including medical school. The intervention would be this flipped learning, and then the O would be improved learning outcomes, which is very broad. So then my approach to that would be to take the population, the P, and start drafting all of the terms that could be used to describe that population. So it's kind of chaotic, right? So if we're interested in all of K-12, then it would be important that we are that we're targeting these things, right? We're thinking about what the scholars would actually include in their title and abstracts. And we would do that for each of these framework letters. So the P for population may look like this, whereas the I for intervention may look like this. So we found in the literature that it's not just flipped learning or flipped classroom, it's also flip the class, and also inverted learning. And so we had to add invert to the mix as well. And I'm going to talk on a future slide of what this means here with the N. So this is proximity searching, where I'm saying we want this word within 10 words of this word. It's kind of a complicated example. And then what we would do with this framework, I'm using PO here, is we'd and those things together. So we take the population search and it with the intervention search and it with the outcome search. And the final result would be what we're handing over to the team to screen. Now I'm skipping through lots of steps here, right? We're skipping through the testing. I would want to run these through the databases to make sure it is actually capturing those seed articles. We're skipping over things like identifying different synonyms and really thinking through the different terms used across time. So the evolution of terms, and also the different terms used in different countries, which is important for education. I don't think I need to go in depth on these slides, but I'm just wanting to let folks know that you don't need to feel stuck with PICO or PO. There's plenty of other frameworks that you could use depending on your topic. Spider, Spice. Okay. So maybe we've thought through designing that search strategy for a particular database. It might be ERIC or PsycInfo. And we would test it and, really feel good about it. We're maybe tweaking things. I often give my teams a holdout sample, so a portion of the results, and then they can run through their inclusion, exclusion criteria, and normalize. And they could even calculate inter-rater reliability at that point with the results, or that portion of the results. And then we would start translating it to those other databases that also appear to be containing this literature. And that can be a tricky process. So depending on which platform you're using, such as EBSCO versus Ovid and ProQuest, there could be a different syntax. There's also different subject headings. So each subject database has their own subject headings. And you'd want to consider those changes as well. And so with the syntax, I'm referring to things like field codes. If you think about the metadata contained in, for example, a journal article record, this would be things like title, abstract, authors' names. Sometimes their institution has a field code. The author provided keywords often have a field code. And so then you'll start to see these when you're developing your searches. Wildcards I'm going to get to on a future slide, but these are things like an asterisk used after like a root of a word in order to capture all of the different iterations of a term. There's phrasing, there's Boolean operators and proximity operators. There's just a lot going on. So let's go deeper into each of these things. I bet some of you are already familiar with phrasing. So phrasing is when we have a known phrase and we can put quotation marks around it because we want to require our search to target only studies that have those terms together in that order. So if you put quotation marks around it, that's usually what the database is doing. There are some databases that use curly brackets instead. And so your quotation marks could be disregarded, and they prefer that you use these curly brackets in order to have those terms together. There's also databases that reject curly quotation marks, which a lot of our word processors are defaulting to now. And so you may want to change the default of your word processors to do straight quotation marks instead of curly, because if you're documenting a search in a Word document and then copying and pasting into a database, your search might not be doing what you want it to do. Or if you're using Ovid, you could be rejected as having unsupported characters. So you might be getting an error message and very confused about why. It could be those pesky curly quotation marks. Wildcards and truncation would be use of oftentimes the asterisk. And this comes up with, or I'm often using these for things that have different spellings. So UK English versus US English with the OR and the OURs. An asterisk could be used in labor and behavior in order to capture both iterations of the word. And in most cases, this asterisk is accepted. There are some databases that also permit a question mark or the pound sign. And sometimes these things mean different things. So the asterisk typically means any amount of additional characters. And the question mark and the pound sign, I've seen most often to mean 1 or 0 characters. So you might see it where like a hyphen is used. So right now I'm working on a direct support personnel review, and sometimes direct support has a hyphen and sometimes it does not. And so that question mark or the pound sign can be used in different databases to represent hyphen or not. All right, Boolean operators. This is like getting into like math conversations. But and is used when you're combining things like that PICO framework. The P and the I would be anded together. And every time we're using and, we're narrowing, right? So we're requiring this component and this component. And so your number of search results might be large for the P and large for the I. But when we slap an and between the two, it's shrinking, right? It's that Venn diagram. Whenever we're using or, we're expanding. So we're saying we are cool with these terms or this subject heading, you know, whatever fields you're looking in. And so or is expanding your search. You can put all those synonyms together. And then databases typically use not, but I also am aware of like Scopus uses and not to mean the same thing. But that's removing things, right? So that's saying we do not want any results that use this term or this set of terms or this phrase. And databases need you to be very clear about what steps you want to perform first. So here we have parentheses around autism spectrum disorder or ASD, because we want to tell the database to perform that operation first. And then we have the not added on here. So we might say not acute stress disorder, which is often captured when we search for ASD. I would caution against using not unless you really understand how the operator works. It's problematic with comorbidity. So perhaps there's a study that is referring to population diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder as well as acute stress disorder. And so if you're nodding that out, you might be eliminating things from your yield that you actually wanted. Okay, so you have to take great care with the not Boolean operator. Field codes, I already kind of mentioned this, but it's going to vary in how these are used in the syntax of different databases. So in ERIC, they use DE to refer to what I call subject headings. The DE stands for descriptors, whereas the medical subject headings use mesh. And each database has different formatting for things like title. So TI in front of terms in ERIC, in the EBSCO database are searching within the title field. Whereas if you're using an Ovid database, it will be the terms.ti. Do you need to memorize these things? No. Typically, a database has a drop-down menu for you to select which field you're searching in. And Ovid has all of their field codes in the advanced search field, and you could select which ones you want searched. Subject headings, kind of mentioned this already, but each of the subject databases has their own taxonomy, and these are updated and evolve based on lots of things. So different education legislation might influence the thesaurus used by ERIC. DSM changes could influence the APA taxonomy used in PsycInfo. National Library of Medicine constantly has had, especially recently, to update their mesh headings. You can imagine, like, as each COVID variant comes out, they're busy updating the mesh headings. So, for example, this is the ERIC thesaurus for the term stuttering. It's under the broader category of speech impairments. And you can kind of envision this like a family tree. So stuttering would be the parent, speech impairments is the parent, and stuttering is one of their children. Some databases permit you to explode a subject heading. You'll start seeing this language now when you're in a database. So if I explode stuttering, that's going to capture all of the children as well. So if I exploded stutter, that's going to get any of the narrower terms. In this case, there are none. If I explode speech impairments, that's going to bring stuttering along as well in the search results. Kind of confusing. The subject headings in this thesaurus oftentimes tell you related terms, and this could be very enlightening, right? This could be like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know there was a subject heading or that people were calling it this. And so then you might add those subject headings as well. And then it can be helpful to know when these subject headings were added. Sometimes you'll find a subject heading added very recently, and it might clue you into some terms that were used in the past that you might want to add to your search. And then you're going to have to translate that to each additional database. So PsycInfo uses a different taxonomy. Instead of speech impairments as the parent, we have speech disorders, and the child here would be stuttering. Similar time period, 1967 was when they added the term stuttering, and there's a nice historical note here that could help us identify studies that maybe use terms like stammering. Okay. Hedges and filters. So hedges, kind of hard to describe, but basically you might not need to recreate the wheel. Somebody could have done a search strategy on your topic previously, and they might have transparently reported it in an article or on a website. And you might be able to borrow some of their terms, right? And there's even instances where these searches, these hedges, are validated. And I would really like to get into the work of validating search hedges in the social sciences, so folks don't have to recreate the wheel each time. So let's have a hedge for flipped learning. Wouldn't that be wonderful? So then you each don't have to design the search. We can each use the same validated heading or hedge. So I would recommend checking to see if there's a hedge out there, or if an article contains a hedge that you would be able to provide in your search strategy. I've done enough reviews now that are only interested in the United States. And so I went ahead and designed a hedge that's specific to the 50 states. So it's basically just slapping an or between the 50 states. I would add United States to this hedge as well, and then pop that into each of my searches where the authors are adamant that they do not want results that are outside of the United States. And this sometimes happens with education. I'm going to share my slides, so this hyperlink will be accessible to you, but there is a website that has that's browsable, so you'll be able to see some of the hedges that they are indexing on this page or curating. You're probably, if you're attending this session, aware of bias against the null and why systematic reviews are supposed to target those studies that might be in the gray literature. So let's talk about the challenges of identifying those things. So the peer-reviewed literature might not contain the null and negative findings, and these might be things that end up showing up in people's file drawers. It might be in conference presentations that never make it to a peer-reviewed journal article. And this happens for a variety of reasons, including journals prioritizing positive findings or folks choosing not to publish things because tenure historically has not rewarded this work. So with systematic reviews, the gold standard is to include the gray literature. So this unpublished literature, sometimes you'll see on listservs, people will send a message saying, I'm working on a systematic review on this topic. If you have unpublished data on this topic or unpublished studies that might be documented in a conference presentation, please share them with me. So they're going the extra mile to try to identify that literature. Some other items that you might not traditionally think of being gray literature would be sometimes government agency reports, technical reports, these conference proceedings, preprints and working papers. There's an education preprint server, Ed Archive, that I've gotten in the habit of checking. Sometimes, not typically in the disciplines that I support, patents, theses and dissertations are usually really rich and unpublished and ongoing studies that could be targeted through things like listserv messages. Theses and dissertations and preprints can be a little tricky because these could be showing up as duplicates, where you have something that is a preprint showing up in your results. You might have searched an Ed Archive, but then it's also showing up in your results as a journal article, right? And so you'll want to decide, because you don't want to double count, which one is preferred. Maybe one is a lot more detailed than the other, or you might have a different decision flow for deciding which one to include. I used to tell teams that they should prioritize the journal versions of something over the dissertation and theses version of something. And now I feel very differently about that, because the theses and dissertations are so rich with detail, and detail that could be super helpful. So you could include both, but just make sure you're not double counting it. Okay, so how you find the gray literature really varies on your topic. You're going to want to think about who would be interested in publishing on your topic. and maybe target specifically. You could be going directly to an agency's website and using the search functionality on their page, which is usually very simplistic and sometimes has limitations on how many characters you can use. The Boolean operators may or may not work, and you might not have any idea whether or not they're working because of the black box algorithms. So if folks aren't transparent about their algorithms, you'll likely have no idea what's going on. Same with Google and Google Scholar. Some Graylit is easier than others to find. So conference proceedings that are well indexed, maybe it's a supplemental issue of a journal, could be discoverable in the more traditional databases. And some dissertations and theses are in not only the subject-specific databases, but also ProQuest's database called ProQuest Dissertations and Theses. My institution recently upgraded to the global dissertations and theses, but ProQuest charges, higher fees for how broad of a scope your dissertations are. So maybe they're in a specific discipline, or they might be like US based. I'm pretty sure we used to subscribe to something that was only Big Ten because we're University of Minnesota, but we thought it was valuable to be thinking globally, so we changed. Some databases are better at other in terms of capturing the Graylit. Eric is more, is interested in sharing these reports that come out of our, different regions, as well as from the Department of Education. When you're going to look somewhere like Google Scholar and Google proper, again, remember that the algorithm is hidden. We don't know exactly what's happening, and that may thwart reproducibility, right? So if you're transparently showing how you search these places, it might not be reproducible because folks performing your same search may get different results based on their profile or a different order of results. And they, especially in Google Scholar, limit how many pages you can actually get to, right? So you're only able to see up to a certain number of pages. And so it really matters, that rank, the order of things really matters between my profile and your profile, and we might not be seeing the same things. Okay, we can site search when we're in Google. So there might be a website a specific website like who that you want to search. So in the search bar in Google, you can write site : whatever website you're interested in your search terms. I ask teams for conferences presenting on their topics, or conferences that have sessions on their topic. So here's an example of a review that was on effective teaching methods for statistics. And so there's an International Association for Statistics Education, and they have their various conferences curated on a web page. Okay, so I had to hand search these conference pages to identify literature, and it was really fruitful. It was a pain to search, but it ended up producing a lot of results that are going to meet the inclusion criteria for this team. Sometimes when you're doing this work, you hit link rot. So URLs that are no longer working. Sometimes I have URLs that lead me to places like porn sites. So like domains that are no longer maintained by the originator, that are now like scooped up by sites that I don't want to visit. So that's something to keep in mind. I've used the Wayback Machine before. If I do have a URL that no longer works or is now taken over by something weird, so I can pop it into the Wayback Machine, which is a tool of the Internet Archive, to look to see what it used to be. And that might show a conference session that I then would be able to share with my team. How you go about doing your gray literature should really be tracked. So here's an example of where you could take whatever database you're using to target the gray literature, or a search like a website, the URL, how you conducted your search, so the search string, the different Boolean operators, and the total number of results. So just in case you end up having to report this, it's worthwhile to have tracked it. Okay, so speaking of what you need to report, let's talk a little bit about that. PRISMA, the newest PRISMA 2020, is pretty helpful in terms of telling you what specifically you need to report about your search strategy. So where did you look? How and what terms did you use? So my practice is to, I indicate this in the methods section of the paper and adhere to the PRISMA guidelines, as well as in an appendix, list the databases and the various syntax for each database. I've started being more comprehensive, and I want somebody to, maybe they want to replicate and extend my search at a different date. I want to give them all of those search strategies. The PRISMA flow, obviously, like what the librarian or the person doing the searching offers would be really important to the PRISMA flow, right? Because you need to say how many search results you got from the various databases, and then the deduplication numbers, etc. And then folks are set up to perform their screening. Sometimes you'll see those hand searching results. So like the things that I found via that conference website come in through the top, and other times you'll see them like come in through the side. And so they might be added down here. Yeah, they might have like some eyeball level screening. So you're like, oh, this would definitely meet the criteria, and you might not send it through the whole flow. And so that might be like marked differently on your PRISMA. I want to mention that there's a difference between conducting and reporting guidelines. It's a pet peeve of mine when people say that they conducted their review according to PRISMA. So PRISMA, yeah, I see the hand raised. So PRISMA is for reporting. Conducting guidelines are something else. Conducting guidelines would be like a playbook for you to do your research. So Arsky and O'Malley has a scoping review article giving you guidance. You might conduct a scoping review according to Arsky and O'Malley, or you might conduct a review according to Cochrane or Campbell, Messier, whatever. Conduct your review according to best practices laid out in these playbooks. But when you're reporting, you're adhering to things like PRISMA or JARS, which comes out of APA, and there's different reporting guidelines for different disciplines. From a search standpoint, what I would include in the appendix would be details like as specific as this. So I could say in line 1 of my search, this looks like either a PsycInfo and Ovid or Medline Ovid search. I could say that I exploded the subject heading for infants. And line 2 of my search, I looked for any instance of these terms used in the record. TW often stands for text word. So a word in the bib record. So that would be title, abstract, author provided keyword. Line 3 is I am cool with any study that uses either the subject heading infant or any of its children, or any instance of those terms. Okay, so this is just a snapshot, only the population. What you're reporting in the appendix would typically be much more detailed than this, right? It would include all of those different components that you're requiring and details about which database and what platform you used. Okay, so my institution has PsycInfo in Ovid platform, but I bet a lot of you have PsycInfo in EBSCO. Okay, so it's important to make that distinction because the syntax will be different. Another pet peeve of mine is when people say, for this review, we looked in the databases ProQuest, EBSCO, and Ovid. Those are platforms, those are not databases. You're going to want to be specific about which collections you looked at, which databases. Databases would be like ERIC, Education Source, Medline, PsycInfo, Business Source Premier. These are databases. EBSCO, ProQuest, Ovid are the platforms which facilitate the search. So somebody should be able to pick up what I have put on this slide, run this same search in Ovid, Medline, or PsycInfo, wherever this was, and you would get the same results as me. It's an exact thing. It's not like Google Scholar and Google Proper, where they are doing different things like lematize. So they're taking, if you put in the word mouse, it's also going to give the results for mice. That's not happening in most of these databases. Okay. So that's why when I do the search and you do the search, we're getting the same results. Okay. So when I talk about the reproducibility of a search, this would be somebody being able to pick up my search strategy and run it in the same database, so the same materials, and get the same results. This is helpful because you're doing a story, you're telling a story that you are being really rigorous and you're not cherry picking. Other scholars could run your search, check your results. Replicability, you can think of as if somebody picks up your review and wants to extend it. So maybe your review is getting outdated now. They're going to pick up your search strategy, replicate and extend to a different time period. Or maybe they're going to take your search strategy and use it in a different database. Living systematic reviews, I think we're going to be hearing a lot more of this. They've become really popular during COVID, are also an instance when somebody would want to replicate in these different databases, maybe representing different time periods. And you may want to replicate your own search. So it's super important that you've kept detailed information. Okay, I promise I'm almost done. What's ahead? I think some of these search processes are going to become more automated. And especially like living systematic reviews, you could set up search alerts to run your search strategy on like a weekly basis and send you the RAS file that you would then send to your team to screen. I like using SR Toolbox. It's a website that has a lot of these cool tools that are being developed, and you could limit to specifically look at search. We are going to have better pre-registration and registered report options. There was just a webinar last week for a new template that's been established that's going to be on Open Science Framework Registry soon. That's specific to systematic reviews. So the questions that they're asking in the registration template are going to be a better match for systematic reviews than what's currently available. This is important for reviews outside the health sciences. The health sciences have had better options for registering, such as Prospero, which limits to health outcomes. And so this has been much needed, in my opinion, and I'm really happy to see this happening because it's best practice to register a protocol. And I would recommend, if your librarians haven't been trained on supporting evidence synthesis, and that would be of value to you as a researcher, that you could suggest that they apply for our Evidence Synthesis Institute. We've been holding these twice a year through this IMLS Institute of Museum and Library Services grant. And so our application period is open right now for our next institute. That's going to be in March. And so they could apply to attend this 4-day institute and be better, perhaps able to help your review target the literature. Questions?
We have a couple of questions on the chat.
Okay.
About Google Scholar. Willa has a question. For Google Scholar, would it help to not sign in to your own profile when doing the search? And Terry has a follow-up. Should you search Google Scholar at all?
So I do search Google Scholar for a lot of reviews, but it's definitely not my primary. So I would not start with it. Google Scholar, it's hard, like it's really good at recall, but it's really hard to be precise, right? So it's like fire hose. You get a lot of results and do not have a easy way of exporting them out, right? So it's super challenging. One thing, where was I going to go with this? Google Scholar, oh, cited by. I really, really like citation chaining in Google Scholar. So if you look up a known item, maybe you take everything that met your inclusion criteria from the database searching. If you look it up in Google Scholar, click on cited by, and then you can do forward citation tracking, with the assumption being that anything that cited this piece would potentially meet my criteria. So there's different ways to use Google Scholar to target and be more precise. Does it change your search results when you log out? Not necessarily. So it's going based on many things, although it's not transparent, but the assumption is that it's based on like your preferred language. And it's going based on your IP address. So like geography things are coming into play, your preferred language. Some people have recommended incognito browser. And so like, I don't think that's going to fix the IP address problem, but maybe. Yeah, I don't know. It's messy, right? Like it's messy and they could be changing their algorithm. And so like what I'm telling you today might be irrelevant tomorrow. So yeah, if you're going to use Google Scholar, I would say think about ways that you could do it in a more precise way. You'll notice when you do a search in Google Scholar that the number of search results, I think is after 1000, all end in a 0. So it's an estimate. You're not even aware of how many total results you're getting from Google Scholar. And like I mentioned, you can only get so far if you click through the pages. I know because I've hit that point before where I can no longer see results. I max out. Another problem with Google Scholar is that when you're doing that sophisticated of a search, Google Scholar thinks you're a robot. And so you end up having to like find the tractor, find the bicycle again and again. And I've been completely blocked out of Google Scholar. So they don't even question if I'm a robot anymore. They say, we think that, you know, something nefarious is happening with your use of Google Scholar. And so then they'll block me for a few days and then I'll get back in. So it's hard, right? It's hard to be precise. And when you do try to be precise, they might think you're a robot or completely block you out.
David has a question.
Yes, I was impressed with how complex even in what I would have thought a simple search would be in expressing all those combinations of things. And it made me think, what if you had a search for something that doesn't have those terms? Like I was thinking, what if I wanted to find out the all instances of meta-analyses that were done before the term was developed? So you wouldn't know the term, you just have to use things like combining results or combining studies or combining research. How tough do you think it would be to find meta-analyses before you could search for that term or research synthesis or anything like that?
Yeah, so like by rule right now in PRISMA, you're supposed to list the review type. So meta-analysis or meta-analytic methods should be in the title. But when it's not, I would say that's going to be very, very challenging. One, we're relying on scholars to be loquacious in their abstracts, and they're often not abstracts. I said I'm going to start a band someday called the Bad Abstracts. So like in the health sciences, it's pretty common to have like a structured abstract where you are having to include parts like the IMRAD structure in your abstract. Abstracts in the social sciences are so, I mean, across the board, there's some good ones, there's some bad ones, but a lot of them are terrible. And so you can't trust that they're going to use meta-analysis in those, you know, in that conversation either, not just the title, but also the abstract. I think
these are generally articles that wouldn't have abstracts. For example, meta-analysis, the term I think was 1976 when it started. And there are known studies in 1904, 1920s, and things like that were meta-analyses. But how you track them all down when there probably weren't abstracts in articles then, and the titles wouldn't have had anything to do with it. I can't figure out how you would do that.
So I think what you're describing is more of like a census. So I see this with bibliometric studies. So not really evidence synthesis, it's a little different, but you would basically want to export everything from a journal and perform screening on it, right? So you can't be dependent on the certain words that they're using you would instead want to take like a census approach. So you'd get everything and then perform the screening. But yeah, you're right that not everything has an abstract. This is like a more recent development too. James?
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. I posted in the chat here for citation screening. There's for chasing citations. There's this new tool by Neil Hathaway and some of his colleagues called Citation Chaser.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have experience with that, but it looks quite nice.
Yeah.
A way around, the Google Scholar, just pointy clicky. I was wondering about something that's always bugged me about like the process of search and screening is it seems like you do your work on the front end, and then this army of students does the screening process, and it seems like it would be useful to like get some feedback back up the chain, right? Like after the search is done, well, we know how sensitive and specific it ended up. And it seems like that would, in principle, let you refine the search. I don't know if you've ever done anything that's like remotely like this, or if it's useful, or if it's just kind of a
I have. Yeah. So recently on a review that's about self-injurious behaviors, non-suicidal self-injury. We constructed the search. It was well tested. It was very thoughtful. It was very thorough. Screening began, and the search team came back to me and said, "We are not seeing results for PICA. I need you to like help us identify that language." So then I reran the search specific to PICA and deposited those search results we were using Covenants. But I want to mention that because I think that there's a misconception that like whatever you registered in your protocol, you're stuck with. Like your search strategy you put in your protocol, you're stuck. No, I mean, it's good to separate exploratory from confirmatory, but things happen and you can add an addendum to your protocol.
Yeah.
You're just going to want to justify that choice. But I think that's an important thing to think through. Like, yeah, do go back to the librarian and say something doesn't seem right, or I don't know. Usually the hiccups are found before the screening begins, I hope. But I think that's a good conversation to have.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. I'll say last call. And if there's no more questions, Amy, thanks so much for coming to present today. This is tremendously educational.
Oh,
I think I'm gonna need to assign this in my systematic review course now, because you just clarified things so nicely, much better than I ever would.
Oh, thank you.
So thanks very much. And I'll say to everyone, so our next seminar will be coming up in mid-January. We're going to have GJ Melendez-Torres talking about mixed methods and qualitative systematic review. Promises to be quite enlightening also. So happy winter break, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you all.